I've actually been listening to interviews of Stephen Clapham, and I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, but if you go on YouTube, you can find his resources there, and it's someone I highly recommend. The reason being is because he's studied various instances of businesses essentially engaging in fraud and sort of spotted trends and ways that you can sort of be more alert. And a lot of his approach is very common sense check, which I think is very practical. It's something which doesn't require for you to become vastly experienced, but rather just simply being aware and open to what is going on around you. Some of his methods sort of include being understanding of why the business has higher. This is in the instance if you're looking at a business which has higher than industry standard operating margins. Why is that? You need to know that because pretty much every single fraudulent company has higher operating margins than industry standard. Reason so is because it's easier to fabricate net income than it is to increase revenue significantly. Therefore, if you know there are certain hallmarks of the business that sort of lead it to have high operating margins. So, for example, Google is dominant in search. It's like the only player it has that ecosystem, the marketing ecosystem behind it. Apple is pricing power for the brand. So they're very obvious examples as to why. So if you can't figure out why that business has higher operating margins, chances are it might not actually have those high operating margins. So something you need to be alert and aware of. Um, that's a very good red flag for me. In terms of another thing is, for example, just also in terms of the operating margin, just sense check it. He gives this example of a cake shop that sells most of its product in person, and cakes being very perishable, and they're more costly to make than like coffee shops, coffees, for example. And what you would have found with this company that you described was that actually the coffee businesses were making, if not as much or slightly less than this cake shop was supposedly making in terms of its net income margins. And if you just took a minute to say, hold on, what's going on here? Because last time I checked, these shops were nowhere near as busy as Cafe Nero. They didn't have as so they not only did they not have as many customers per store for size, most of their customers were eating in, whereas Cafe Nero, a lot of the customers go out, so that reduces your sort of your cost associated with the space. You don't need as large of a space. Number three, coffees are dirt cheap to make in comparison to sort of a cake with all the creams and everything, and nowhere near as perishable. So you just have to sort of take it into account, do some sense checks. There's other methods as well, such as looking at inventory. So how is inventory increasing proportional to revenue, or is it outstripping revenue? This might not be fraud necessarily, but it could just show weakness in the company. Same thing with accounts receivables. Accounts receivables shouldn't be increasing more as a percentage than revenue is, because that signals to us that the company is struggling to collect money, which can be a very negative sign. Again, not necessarily fraudulent on this one. Another sort of sign could be that you might want to watch out for is inventory turnover days. So how long are they turning over this inventory? Again, back to that cake shop example. Stephen mentions that they were supposedly selling cakes on average every 90 days, which is questionable if you just took the time to think about it. Again, easier said than done, but it's just sort of being alert and open to these kind of things, having these tricks in your tool belt, perhaps have it in your checklist. And it increased from like 30 days as well. And also, so that in itself is a red flag again. Another thing is also just comparing it to industry standards. What's the industry standard inventory turnover for this product? Is something to be aware of again. Another sort of trick as well is that these businesses may show higher than average net income or operating margins, but chances are their return on invested capital is actually not going to be as high. So if you have a business which has got high net income margins, but also high return on invested capital, chances are it's not as fraudulent or less likely so.